Well, all right, I'm going to formally get this started. Good evening. My name is James Ebert, and I have the great honor of being your moderator for tonight's event. Tonight, we are going to be closing out our celebration in honor of the Criminal Justice Appreciation Month with our first responders panel. This is an event that Purdue Global has hosted in the past. We took a year or two off, and we're bringing it back. So we look forward to finish out this month of celebration. We have an outstanding panelist with a lot of accolades behind their names and a lot of good practitioners doing a lot of good work for their communities and the world as we sit. So, without further ado, I think we'll start off, and I'll start tonight's introductions with Dr. Regina Bodek.
Good evening, everyone. Can you all hear me? Awesome. So, good evening, everyone. My name is Dr. Regina Boyton. I currently serve as an Assistant Supervisory Air Marshal in charge in our Strategic Communications and Public Affairs Division of the Law Enforcement Federal Air Marshal Service, which is one of two law enforcement entities of the Transportation Security Administration, but also known as TSA. I started my career with the Federal Air Marshal Service in 2009 as a mission status flying Federal Air Marshal out of our Newark, New Jersey field office. From there, I spent about 6.5 years in the field where I did additional assignments in our operations section and also our visible intermodal prevention and response teams, which provides augmented assets to federal, state, and local law enforcement entities on passenger rail, maritime, and other surface transportation venues. From there, I transferred to our agency headquarters in Herndon, Virginia, where I served in our information coordination section, also known as our investigative division. And I had the opportunity to work with the Federal Bureau of Investigation in their international terrorism operations section, and also their crimes against children and human trafficking section as well, providing operational support for their human trafficking investigations and also counterterrorism investigations. I've also served as a field supervisor in our Minneapolis field office, and I couldn't get enough of DC, so I came back to DC, where I now serve in the role as PIO, or Public Information Officer, but I'm now currently detailed to the White House as a White House Situation Room duty officer. So I look forward to sharing my career journey, also some challenges, some highs and lows with this esteemed panel. So thank you all for the opportunity.
Thank you so much for being here tonight. And for those that have been to some of our previous events would know her. She was also a panelist for us recently on the Women in Justice system. And like I said earlier, thank you for your attendance. It is the most attended online event that we've hosted outside of graduation. So super proud of that. Before I go on with the other panelists, I wanted to give an opportunity to tell everybody in attendance, as this panel goes on, if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. We'll try to screen them. We've got some questions we already are going to ask, and I will try to pick out some on along the way as well. So next up, I'd like to introduce Rebecca Foster, who's a police officer with the Richmond Police Department. Rebecca?
Hello, everyone. Like he used to be my chief, but Chief Ebert says, I work patrol for the Richmond Police Department. This is my 4th year working night shift. I'm currently a training officer, so I help train new recruits after they come out of the academy, getting ready to get on the road and be independent. I'm a certified hostage negotiator, went to FBI training for that, and so I get to help. We call it our ERU team, our emergency response unit, which is similar to like a SWAT team. We help them try to negotiate peaceful resolutions on conflicts. I do a lot of volunteer work in the schools. So I work school overtime detail to stay around the kids. And then I also coach middle school softball, which is where I'm at right now. So I'm excited to meet you all and to hear any questions you all have.
Thank you very much. And she is one of the coaches over the years that has helped my daughter be successful as a catcher. So I'm always appreciative to her. So next up, we'll go to Wendy Lynch, who's the 911 director for Madison County. I'm sorry, E911 director. Ms. Wendy Lynch.
Thanks, everybody. My name is Wendy Lynch. I am the current director. I did not retire. I should be retired, but I'm actually here at work now. They asked me to stay, and I just can't get enough of it. I have almost 27 years experience in criminal justice. I started out as a dispatcher for the Richmond Police Department in 1998. I became director of the Consolidated 911 Center here in Madison County, Kentucky in 2008. Chief Ebert was my chief and served on our board of directors for a while, so I've had the pleasure of working with him. In my career time, I was the 2016 Kena APCO Director of the Year for the state of Kentucky. And in 2023, I was the recipient of the Blake T. Haskell Excel in Excellence Reward. And that's a new award that Tracy Elder just put out. She does a lot with 911 as far as mental health and safety. She's with On Scene First, so I was very privileged and honored to receive that award. Within my career, I have started out as a dispatcher. I've worked through consolidations. I'm here to talk about some of the financial and strains on 911 centers, as well as mental health and those kind of things as we move along the industry and the growth in technology. I've worked with police agencies on their own, but now we're in a consolidated center, so we dispatch for everybody in the county here. So we have a lot of interactions with police, fire, EMS, and law enforcement side, as well as serving on the domestic for violence. We have what's called a blueprint that we follow. We're the only ones in the state that do that. So we take cases from the beginning of the 911 call and the importance of that and what you're doing, and legally what you say, and things that follow all the way through to the prosecution in those domestic violence cases. So I'm honored to have served on that. I've served on some Next Gen 911 task force. We have a chemical stockpile emergency preparedness program here that is federal, where they're demilling a lot of weapons and things at our base site here. So we've been really involved and heavily in that. Over 30 years that's been here, and it's going away in the next year or so. And I serve as a Region 9 coordinator for the Kentucky Telecommunicators Response Task Force for dispatchers to respond in areas that have been hit with tragedies. And I'm just excited to be here and answer any questions you might have in the telecommunications side.
Thank you very much, Director. Her blueprint for safety, I'm sure she'll get into it later on today. As someone that sat on that board, if you work with domestic violence or domestic violence victims, she is an outstanding point of contact. That system is very impressive about cleaning up the professionalism, how law enforcement, E911, and other first responders respond specifically to the call. So thank you very much. Next up, we would like our representative from a fire EMS side, Chief Randall Pinkerton.
Thank you. And thank you to everybody who's joining this evening. It's important for you to stay involved, not only early on, but throughout your career. So great opportunity. I am a fire chief for a suburban and rural fire and EMS organization. We serve 11 municipalities, crossed about 220 square miles, spread out across 3 counties in south central Wisconsin. 2 stations. We are in the process of building 2 more. Staffed with about 21 full-time personnel, 37 what would be called paid on call, the volunteer force, and then we have a very robust student intern program. We have 9 interns right now, going to 12 next year. Personally, I've been in the emergency services, first response world for about 45 years. I have worked with 6 different departments over that time. I've been a chief officer since 1992, so the last 32 years, and with 2 different departments. Very involved at the state level with our State Fire Chiefs Association, have held lots of different positions. But also we use a system called MABUS, which is Mutual Aid Box Alarm System. I literally, about 30 years ago, was part of writing the legislation that created that within our state. And I've been on that executive board for many, many years. the biggest thing that we've done in the last couple of years, other than planning to add 2 more fire stations, we've actually integrated a series of standalone fire departments into a single entity serving this 220 square mile area. And that is kind of a reflection of the evolution and the change in the emergency services world, certainly on the fire and EMS side, which we'll probably get into a little bit later. James?
Chief, it's great having you on. Thank you. And our final panelist tonight is the esteemed Dr. Gerald Sandusky.
Thank you, James. Jared Sadolski. So I thank you for the opportunity to be here. So a little bit about me. I did 26 years in federal law enforcement. During that time, was spent mostly in Miami, Florida, where I was working counter trafficking. I was on some different task forces. I worked with what's called HIDA, high intensity drug trafficking area. Worked with, I was detached on a task force with the Miami-Dade Police and Narcotics Bureau, where we were working narcotics cases coming in from the Bahamas. Did some counterterrorism work after 9/11. I actually had the opportunity to apprehend a terrorist that was plotting to conduct a terrorist attack at the port of Miami, at the bridge, and we were able to actually interdict that and get involved before it happened. So that was pretty young in my career. Moving on, I retired actually in May of last year from the federal law enforcement. I also did some local law enforcement in the Miami Fort Lauderdale area for about 7 years. So fast forwarding to today, one thing that Dr. Boateng, I hope I pronounced that correctly, mentioned that is something near and dear to me is counter human trafficking. So for the last 6 years, I've been actively involved in counter human trafficking. I spent time, in fact, 2 weeks ago, I was in Bogota, Colombia, as the guest of Interpol, working with those guys on a case, as well as providing them training and receiving training from them. I also work throughout Central America in counter trafficking. A lot of it's awareness and education. I have a nonprofit, that's geared specifically toward anti-trafficking. And I've gone to the border. What I've seen is horrifying. And what I've seen in communities that involve trafficking situations is horrifying. And so I've been very much an advocate for trafficking victims. I've testified in the last year before the United States Congress, as well as before the United States Senate in 2024 on counter trafficking. Forgive me, November 2023 and then July of 2024, I testified for the Senate. And I am consistently, keeping, the drumbeat up, with our legislators, with our policymakers to not let this issue go away. I work with some different organizations that we create policy recommendations on how to mitigate trafficking, which we recently provided to the Secretary of Homeland Security, and she accepted them. So that's a little bit about the work that we're doing, but my biggest thing right now is the anti-human trafficking.
Thank you very much. As everyone can see, very distinguished panelists there. And what I really love is you can see just by the backgrounds, a lot of people putting in a lot of time, not only off duty, doing extracurricular stuff, but some of them are even still at work working right now and still took the time out for this panel. So we're very appreciative to have each and every one of you here. So the first question is going to be for each panelist. Very simple one. We're going to start with Dr. Regina. It'll be, what inspired you to become a first responder, or if you need to elaborate just into your current career field, that's fine too.
Thank you very much for that question. So what inspired me to become a law enforcement officer or first responder? I come from a family of law enforcement professionals and also military service members. So I was surrounded by it as a child, but more importantly, during my college years, I had the opportunity to do an internship with a local police department, Tallahassee Police Department in Tallahassee, Florida. And that is what really got me exposed and immersed into the field of criminal justice. I did an internship specifically with the special operations section and also got to do a stint in forensics. And I just fell in love with all things law enforcement. I love the fact that no day was the same. I also love I love the camaraderie in the community that existed within the law enforcement community and the many different career paths that you had within law enforcement and the opportunities not only at the local level, which is what I was exposed to the most, but also opportunities at the state and federal level. And then the icing on the cake was a show that came out during my college years called The First 48, and specifically the Miami-Dade Police Department was very, very pivotal in my choice to definitely stick with law enforcement. And so that is how I wound up where I am now. And to be honest, when I got recruited as an air marshal, I had no idea what an air marshal was. When I was working at the police department, the local police department, or interning there, I had dreams of becoming a DEA agent. And I went to a recruitment fair at the behest of my lieutenant that I was volunteering for at the local police department, who told me about it. And I ran across the booth for the Federal Air Marshal Service, and I was recruited that day and applied that night.
Thank you. It's amazing how like television shows influence me. For me, it was Cops. So that's my age group. It was Cops. But thank you very much. Before we move on that question, just a reminder: if you have questions, put them in the chat. If you want to direct a question specifically at one of the panelists, just put the question in there and then say who it's for, and I'll try to get it to there. Next up, same question: what inspired you to become a first responder, Officer Foster?
So I actually never intended on going into law enforcement or being a first responder. While I was still doing my undergrad work, I became very close with a mentor of mine who is actually one of our local judges, and he encouraged me to apply for drug court. So I worked community corrections, supervising in drug court for a little bit. And then from there, I was poached and started working at the county attorney's office. And then from the county attorney's office, Chief Ebert somewhat poached me, and it really encouraged me to apply to be law enforcement. Working at the county attorney's office, I was a paralegal, and so I took complaints from officers. So when officers came in, I was reviewing their body camera, I was reviewing their case reports, I was prepping dockets for trial, things like that. And I just really fell in love with that type of work. After applying for law enforcement and doing it now, I'm almost at my 5-year mark. I could not imagine going back to a desk job. I just can't imagine not being in my cruiser anymore. It's like my little home away from home. And it gives me the opportunity to branch out and do so many different things. So as I mentioned, like I'm a training officer. I'm CIT certified, which means I work with people with mental health. I take special interest in domestic violence cases, things like that. It's a constant state of growth, and you can always network and continue to better your community, better yourself as an individual. And I just think like the sky's the limit, and it's just I've become addicted to it. But it was never truly my intention to go into law enforcement. But that's where I've ended up now.
Thank you very much. And I could definitely say that Officer Foster is very much attention to detail, and that was why I poached her from from the prosecutor's office. And I don't know what to think about it now that she's been in law enforcement 5 years. Makes me feel even older as a retired chief. So I guess that's the side effect of when you get out, the time keeps going. So next up, let's go to Director Wendy Lynch. What got you inspired you to be a first responder in E911?
Well, I started out when I graduated high school. I went into cosmetology, and I love people. I love to talk, very nosy. Everybody comes in and tells you about their day. It's always exciting. Loved it. I was managing a salon, doing some hair shows, doing some traveling, but I got addicted to a television show, Rescue 911, that ran from 1989 to 1996. And there was an episode of a child who was eating some lunch meat and he was choking, and his mom had to call and ask for assistance. And that dispatcher took that call and walked that mom through the Heimlich and all the steps. And all I could think was, well, I go to work every day, but I'm not doing anything. Like, I'm not making a difference. And how great that must feel to just help people. So then I've got really curious, and my husband was a firefighter at the time. So then I started questioning what they do in dispatch, and they dispatched for themselves at the fire department at the time. The police dispatch wasn't their dispatch then, and they would take turns. So when it was his turn, I would go and sit and listen to him get some of the calls out, because as a rookie firefighter, you always got stuck in the room giving the calls out in the beginning. And so I just looked into it. And once I started, I just never really looked back. I just felt like it was just such a good purpose to have service over self and to really make a difference and help people. I did not realize that people need help with everything from their trash schedule to finding numbers to different places, as well as choking victims. But we have a duty to serve and to help, so we do a lot. And I just couldn't picture myself doing anything else. And as I tried to retire, it was what else would I do, and how would I know what was going on if I wasn't here in the middle of it? And coming through the years of it, starting out in dispatch as a frontline dispatcher, I just kept wanting to do more. And I just felt like sometimes that the center would be overlooked and you were forgotten about and you were the first responder. And then as it moved on, it just became so important to how can we make a difference? We're not just secretaries. We don't just take 911 calls and that be the end of it and put them in the computer. There's so much more. There's investigative work to it. There's just room for improvement on customer service and community relations. And it just keeps growing. And I wish I could say I get tired of it and don't like the change, but I think I'm a change magnet and I like all the technology. And I think back to when we started in my career, we were on cards, nothing went in the computer. We didn't even have caller ID when I started. So I really dated myself there. So those kind of things and just being in the technology and then being involved. And I just think it's such a rewarding career. And you're just such a big help to just responders, community, and each other. So I also cannot imagine doing anything else. I've been trying to think of what I would do, but I have not found it yet. So maybe when I do, I'll retire and let you know.
Well, we thought you were going to retire, so we was about to get that answer, but love of the job brought her back, as it does for many of us. But I think it's kind of interesting. We've had 3 panelists speak, and they've all tied their initial somewhat back to a television show. So I don't know. It's like I said, for me, it was cops, and you hear the other panelists. So next up, we'll go to Fire Chief. I don't know. Was there a Fire Chief or fire show that got you in, Chief Pinger?
You're obviously looking over my shoulder. That was one of the notes I wrote down. A show that predated probably most everyone that's been mentioned so far, just because of my age. The show Emergency, which ran for about 5 or 6 years. I actually have had a chance a couple of times in my career to spend time with one of the lead actors from that show. And it's very interesting because one of the questions that he gets asked really commonly is, where did you guys come up with all that stuff? And he just kind of chuckles and he said, no, all they did was they went down to LA County's fire administration, looked at the logbook, and it just kept writing itself. Which, if you get to the question itself, a lot of times I refer to all of us as having gotten a bug. It becomes entrenched in your DNA. If you are genuinely a person who wants to see your community do better and help your community grow, be safe, it's just something that bites you. And once it gets inside, I do not come from a first responder family. I had no, background around me as I was growing up, but it was something that I sort of got bit by at one point in time. And then obviously the show Emergency. I am a big sports, high school and college sports fan, official, do a lot of things with schools. And I have referred to emergency response as the original extreme sport. It can be very dangerous. It is absolutely unknown. You don't know what the opposition's going to throw at you. You don't know what offense they're going to use, what defense, what traps they've laid for you. And you've got to try to figure all that out in about 2.5 nanoseconds. So, if you're into ultimate sports and you enjoy, if you will, competition against an unknown, uncontrollable opponent, it is something that gets in your blood. So obviously in mine.
You got me beat. I didn't know that the show you referenced, so I'm over Googling it as we go. So, Dr. Sandusky, what inspired you to be a first responder starting off, or what has inspired you in your current career?
Sure. Well, 2 things. So 9/11 was definitely a changing or turning point for me. So at that time I was in the Coast Guard, and that ended up landing me into the newly formed Department of Homeland Security, and I felt like we were making a difference. We were doing the counterterrorism work, and it was very rewarding. But what has inspired me in terms of today's work involving the human trafficking is that I've gone down to the border on both sides, and I've talked to so many victims of trafficking that experienced exploitation en route to the border. In particular, there was a mother in a shelter that I was speaking with in Texas, and that she'd explained the exploitation that she had experienced. Another lady in the same shelter was holding her child in her arms and refused to let her child down. And when asked why, she explained that the cartel stole not only all of her belongings, the other two children she started the voyage with. And that is what really has inspired me today to be actively involved in the anti-trafficking.
Thank you. I'm going to take a quick question, open up to all panelists, not required. We're not going to go down the line, but feel free to chime in and answer this. From Katie asked, how has the reality of your current careers compared to your expectations from the television shows? So for those of us who watched whatever show, how is doing the real job compared? So anybody feel free to chime in on that.
I'll take a shot at it first. I happened to see Katie's question pop up, and it struck me right away. What they show you is the 5 minutes of excitement. What they don't show you is the years and years of preparation, the hours of investigation, the hours of cleanup, the hours of follow-up. And so we do chuckle, especially with the current generation of people coming into our profession, that they need to understand that Hollywood has showed them a microcosm. They have forgotten to show you everything else that comes along with the job.
Absolutely. Any other panelists have an input on this one?
I think for me, with the television show, that dispatcher was only handling one emergency incident at a time, talking to that one officer in that clip, and that one emergency where everything got solved, everything went right, help arrived. They didn't really reflect onto the realness of it, that there's so much more going on in the room. There's several phones, there's lots of screens, there's lots of training to get you to the point to be able to give those pre-arrivals confidently, and that not all calls end like they do on television, and not everything is a save. And when they're not a save, how do people deal with that? The responder and the dispatcher. So that part was enlightening, but that just inspired me more to take the interest in what I do, to try to bring light to mental health and to just keep growing the profession and to let people in the community know what we do and why it's important. And that show, to me, it's been more of an honor than I even thought, saving the life or doing it, even though all of them are not saves. But just knowing that even if you didn't save a life, you still might have done something for a loved one or a responder that found a deceased person or is going through a traumatic moment where things are not right. Even if you couldn't change the outcome of the call, you could still provide a comfort to someone. So I think my expectations were beyond what I thought they could be for me personally.
Thank you. We'll move on to the next question, because I think it's going to answer one of them that's on our list, but also one that's in the chat box, which is, and this is going to be for all panelists, and we'll start with Dr. Regina Bodig. And the question is, what have you found are the biggest challenges facing first responders today, specifically in your current field?
I would say the challenges specifically in my field that we face today is the work-life balance. The Federal Air Marshal Service is unique in the fact that it is 100% mobile. And so we are deployed or on domestic and international flights at any given time from any field office. And we have 20 throughout the nation. And it is also something that even in a supervisory role that I have yet to master. In our role, we are called to be on, basically respond 24/7. And so I have three phones. And so when one is not ringing, the other two definitely are. So rather it is someone that works for me that needs assistance with something or a tasking from a job. That is, I would say, the biggest challenge is definitely having the work-life balance. But what I've also learned is that it can also be challenging to even identify what outlets are beneficial. We do have a very high stress work environment, so that can be a challenge as well. So finding ways to combat stress and also identifying outlets to help relieve that stress as law enforcement practitioners and professionals are some of the challenges that we face. And please excuse my Alexa. She's always chiming in on something.
They're always dropping the E's for sure. Thank you very much. Officer Foster, same question. What are the challenges, biggest challenges you're facing specifically for you in the law enforcement? And then just to kind of weave in one of the questions from one of our students is maybe if you can address that, and then how do you get that work-life balance and mental health aspect of it?
So I would say probably two of the biggest challenges that I've seen so far in my short career have been manpower issues, which that kind of leads into work-life balance, because when we're short-staffed, and especially as like a young gung-ho officer, you feel obligated to pick up these overtime shifts and not leave your fellow officers shorthanded. And if somebody needs to take off to go watch their kids' baseball game or something, you go cover their shift for them. But it can take a toll on you being short-staffed and then you picking up so many hours, because you are throwing your work-life balance off kilter. And so then that typically swings back the other way, and then you'll suffer some at work because you are struggling either with your home life, your mental health is not to where you would like it to be. The other challenge that I've seen a lot is poor emotional intelligence, both like with younger employees as well as like the community. I feel like the emotional intelligence isn't to where it should be, and I don't know if part of that is the increase in technology, and people don't have to be face to face, and they don't have to read facial expressions, they don't have to sit in an uncomfortable space and provide emotional support to somebody even when you can't say any words. They just seem to lack that. That's why we get to a lot of domestics, I think, who can't communicate very well. And I think some young officers struggle too to communicate with other officers, like when they're having a hard time, when they need time off. And it's hard, especially I think for first responders, to admit that in the beginning, when they feel like they should start receiving help. It's hard for them to ask for help or to receive support from other people, because we like to feel like we can do it all ourselves and we're here to help everybody. And so when I see young officers or even senior officers and their family life starts to deteriorate, they tend to try to isolate more or delve into work more, which obviously that is unproductive when you're trying to resolve your work-life balance and your mental health. Personally, I make a big priority of my time off. I try to really make the most of it. I don't really hang out with people at work when I'm off. I typically don't talk to them very much. Almost all of my support system is outside of law enforcement, outside of first responders. But they just help keep me grounded, because I don't talk about work when I come home. I don't really address that stuff, but I also have a really strong core support group at work that they know exactly what I'm going through. They know when my behavior changes. They'll ask me, is everything going okay? Are you just having a bad day, or is this, building up to something more? And we keep each other in check, and we tell each other, like, it's okay to take time off. Sometimes we'll tell each other, like, you need to take time off, like, you need to not come into work tomorrow. But just having a good core support group, I think, really helps maintain a good work-life balance, because they're an outside perspective that can keep you in check and let you know, when you're not acting yourself, even if you're out there trying your best. Sometimes your best isn't your 100% because you're drained. So I think that's the key, is just having a good support group.
Absolutely. And then I wanted to add, I'm sure a lot of the panelists have had the opportunity. When I went to a sergeant's academy, I was exposed to a book called The Emotional Survival, try this again, Emotional Survival Guide for First Responders and Their Family. And that is a very good book that I highly recommend, that kind of discusses some of the challenges that we face as first responders and how we should go about addressing the work-life balance and just the mental anguish that comes with those career fields. So, but I'll go on, keep moving on. Yep, and the author of that is Dr. Kevin Gill Martin. Thank you, Jason. And so let's move to Director Lynch. Same question. What have you found to be the biggest challenge facing first responders for you in the 911 side? And then, if you can, work in any mental health or work-life balance solutions you have.
So one of the biggest things we're facing, of course, is recruitment and retention. It is really hard to recruit people to come in and work a 12-hour shift and be away from their family and dedicate themselves to being away from all of the holidays, those big moments, the birthdays and those kind of things. And then retaining after, for us personally, is such a high call volume and the types of calls over the years and all of the technology, even though it's a help, it's just a lot to use. So the burnout phase that we used to see at the 5 or 7 year mark, we a lot of times now we're seeing at the 3-year mark. So recruitment and retention is a big one. Mental health is another big one in that work-life balance. And so we're very fortunate in the state of Kentucky that the Kentucky Department of Criminal Justice, they have the post-critical incident seminar, which they offer to law enforcement. And they recently, within the last few years, have offered where dispatch can go as well. And that's anonymous, and you can take and go for 3 days, and they provide you a place to stay, a safe space. You can meet with counselors. They divide you up in groups with your peers, and you can talk about things and calls that you've been on, and it's very confidential. And I've done that a few years ago, and I think that was one of the best things that I've ever done and was able to bring back to the agency. When I started in the 90s, you started at a time when something happened, you just block that call out and you compartmentalize it. And then you go to the next call, and then you compartmentalize it and you put it in a box. And then until you actually sit down and start thinking about all the trauma that you've heard and some of the things that probably sounded horrific that maybe might not have been, but you never know because your imagination runs wild over the years, and some things that has nothing to do with work. And that really helped to get it out. And so when I came back a few years ago, as we developed a little more robust internal training, here we decided we would do what's called dialogue with the director. So now when we have new people start, we have the very last day of their in-house academy that's about 8 weeks long. Here, they can bring their family in because the center is secured, so usually people cannot. But we bring them in, we give them a tour of the center, we actually go over some 911 calls, and then we go over a checklist of the types of calls that, their person's going to get yelled at, their person is going to hear someone take their last breath. If they come home and you notice they're drinking more or their behavior has changed, these are things that you should talk to your loved one about. And just, so we explain those things in the dialogue with the director is a lot. And sometimes, the parents of these younger kids will come in as well, not just their spouses. And so they just kind of know what you're coming into because it is very emotional. And to get those balances down and to encourage when they see those types of things to reach out and let them talk to someone. And of course, we offer the employee assistance program and those kind of things. But those are the biggest things. I think mental health is right up there. And one thing I will applaud, a lot of people get, the younger generation, they say they don't have, but they offer so much because they talk so much more freely about those feelings and those things. And it's really, when you get the generational mixes, it's just really nice at how easy they talk about it. And then you see other more senior dispatchers softening up and able to talk about the calls. So those are just kind of my observations over the years.
Absolutely, and I think that is critical. It is, generationally, there's some differences. I'm of that generation. Like Officer Foster was saying, it's basically suck it up and move on to the next call. And there's a ton of studies out there that indicate that's not the healthiest way of holding it, especially over a long-term career. So it's good to see that those changes are being made to help address the next generation on how to deal with that. So, same question to Chief Pinkering. What is the biggest challenges for you, and how do you deal with the work-life mental health aspects.
So, and I'll hit the first part of that and get over it relatively quickly and get to the mental health piece because it is such a huge piece nowadays. But obviously, when you get to the deputy chief, chief level, and law enforcement, fire, federal, whatever level you're at, it is a funding issue. You are in essence running a service business if you think about it in that context. Um, the demands from your staff are going to be greater than you're ever going to be able to convince the politicians that need to be funded. So that becomes a work-life balance kind of a thing where you have to make sure that you're prioritizing and getting the money that you can get, and then the money that you do get, putting it towards the things that are going to matter the most for the service you're providing. That applies across the board. But switching to the mental health piece, and it's already been touched on a couple of times here, and I had commented early on, we run an intern program, we run a high school cadet program, we run a college intern program for kids who are getting engaged in fire and EMS. And that is one of the things that we are starting to realize. One of the first things that I tell them, and as I look at the audience here of people who are investing in themselves to go on and do some great things in the first response world, you literally need to understand we're growing up in a time that is different from my generation and what I understand. And we need help from the people who are living it in real time to help us understand. First response across law enforcement, fire, and EMS, one of the highest suicide rates in the nation and as a profession. One of the highest divorce rates as a profession. Knowing that is great, but the trick is, what are we doing about it, right? And I listened to Officer Foster, Director Lynch talk about the things, right, that you guys are doing. That is what the next generation of leaders in the emergency services has to embrace, is how do we start understanding this and what do we start doing to help the next generation of first responders deal with the stresses and the unknowns. And as somebody said to me early on in my career, you can't unsee some of the things that you see. So how do you deal with that? And that's an important one for everybody on this call to give a lot of time and thought to, as to how we start doing that better.
Absolutely. Dr. Sandusky, any thoughts on what the biggest challenge you'd face? And, you of all people deal with a lot of traumatic stuff, dealing with human trafficking stuff. How do you deal with the mental aspect of that? It's kind of like, for me as a chief, I really didn't like my investigators to do a long stint in something like sexual assaults or something like that, just because mentally over time it grinds you down, assaults against children, things like that. So what's the biggest challenges that you see just as a first responder, and then how do you deal with the mental health and work-life balance in your world?
Sure. So for the biggest challenge, I would say right now is recruitment. And I think that there's been a false narrative in the media toward specifically law enforcement that has really impacted that recruitment. It looks like it might be turning around a little bit, but the vast majority of police officers are ethical, good, hardworking people, and should be supported by the media as well. In terms of work-life balance, it is, I think my experience working in federal law enforcement before getting involved in human trafficking, as I'm doing now through a nonprofit that we co-founded, it, I have the opportunity, to be a voice for the voices, is what I always say. So going before Congress, testifying about the woman that had the 2 children stolen from her, things like that, it's motivating. It angers me, but it motivates me, and it motivates me to work harder for these victims that don't have a voice. In terms of the work life, it really is, I think it was Rebecca mentioned, it really is all about work-life balance and having that time off. And one thing that Rebecca said that stood out to me was the importance of, if you're in law enforcement, having friends that are outside of law enforcement. For my dissertation, my study was on mental health of police officers and how it can be better, how it can be fostered. And out of all the interviews that I did and out of all the work, one of the most significant findings from police officers that have successfully managed stress throughout their career was having that disconnection from the job and having friends that are not affiliated with law enforcement that bring a different perspective of life outside of the police culture.
Absolutely great advice, and I think that is very true for sure right now. So let's move on to the next one. We'll open this up for everybody, and we'll start with Dr. Regina. What advice would you give someone considering a career as a first responder or in your specific career field?
Some advice I would give is definitely don't put all of your eggs in one basket. There are definitely a plethora of law enforcement careers. And sometimes when we think of law enforcement, we sometimes put law enforcement in a box. We're just police officers. You also have corrections because we have a justice system that is very interdependent. I will also say do your research. Identify one of your strengths, also areas that you would like to know more about when it comes to law enforcement. I think shadowing or internship or even mentorship opportunities are very key. I think that it gives you exposure to the field, so you can assess what you like and what you don't like. It also allows you to kind of narrow or define a more specific path that you would like in law enforcement, whether that's federal, whether it's state, whether it's local, volunteering. As we mentioned earlier in the previous question, we spoke to work-life balance, mental health, and also any additional stressors. So essentially knowing taking into consideration what you are getting into. This can be a high stress environment. It does take a toll on mental health. But of course, some of my other panelists, they spoke to those things and resources that are available. But those are the realities of the job as well. The long hours, the many different things that you have to combat at any given time. But I definitely think that if I had to, of all the things that I've said, mentorship is definitely key. And getting exposure to the field as early as you can. I know some agencies, they offer ride-alongs, and I would definitely take advantage of that, being able to ride along with the police officer, get their perspectives, or just any other agency shadowing opportunities as well.
Thank you. That's literally my CJ 100 course in 5 minutes. So thank you very much for laying that out there like that. Officer Foster, same thing. What advice would you give someone who is considering a career for you, let's say in law enforcement?
I think specifically for I work local police, so it's small town, but it's also big town at the same time. Like we're a growing city, but I'm originally from Washington D.C., so it'll never be a real city to me out here. But I think something that's incredibly important is for you to really know yourself. Like, what values and morals do you truly hold dear? Because we see so much and we move so fast in our day-to-day working patrol or being a first responder in general. It can really change you, it can challenge you. You work with a lot of big personalities and people who can push you sometimes to act outside of your normal character. So knowing what core values like you truly hold dear. Some people say I maybe take a little longer on calls than I should, but I have a lot of passion for people who are in active addiction and who struggle with domestic violence relationships. Most domestic violence relationships calls that we go to, they're not going to leave that day. It doesn't matter if they're in the hospital because they got their teeth kicked in. They're not prepared to leave. Otherwise, we wouldn't be called out there. They would have already left. And being patient. Same thing. I work a lot of sexual assaults with my female victims, and I stay in contact with them whether their case comes to prosecution or not, almost on a monthly basis. Just because that's something that I'm really passionate about. It matters to me. Caring about people matters to me. And it's very, especially in law enforcement, it's very easy for you to become jaded and see the worst in people and assume that most people are bad or most people are mean. And then you assume a lot of people are weak. Like I see a lot of people get jaded very quickly because you're just seeing the hot, like really, strong personalities all the time. And I've noticed a lot of like specifically female officers, I think struggle because they try to adapt the personalities of the male officers that they work with, and that's not their strength. And it takes a whole, like a hit on their mental health because that's not who they are. Some of them are more upbeat, cheerful people, and when you come on a shift of a lot of like, I call them old heads, but like older officers who just they're very jaded and that's how they cope. That's part of their coping mechanism. But if that doesn't work for you, then don't adopt that personality, you know? So really getting to know yourself, know what's important to you, and know where you draw the line, because at the end of the day, law enforcement's a career. You know, it's not your lifestyle. You can make your lifestyle if you want. I don't partake to that mindset. At any point you should be prepared to leave your career for a better job if something suits you better, if it's better for your mental health, or if it's going to progress you as a person better. If you think you're going in law enforcement and you're doing great, and then all of a sudden, you know, you're not, it just might not be for you. And to know yourself and to know when it's time to pull the plug, I think, and as Dr. Botang said, like there's so many avenues for our criminal justice system. Not everybody has to be a first responder. I love our dispatch. I think they're phenomenal. Like when we have problems with our computers, or we're having problems with our radio, I feel like our whole world's coming down because our dispatch is just so great. But you can do dispatch. Like I couldn't imagine doing dispatch, you know, but it's somebody else's calling. And if it's not your calling, but you love criminal justice and you love helping people, there's so many different ways that you can do that. Don't get stuck and hung up on, you know, what you thought you were going to do. Like I said, I never thought I was going into law enforcement, and I truly think this is the best job in the world. Like I could not imagine doing anything else.
Know yourself and to be true. Good words. And now I'm officially an old head. I'm like a really old head by Officer Foster's standards. Director Lynch, same question. What advice would you give someone considering a career as a first responder?
Well, I think Dr. Boating said it very well. Don't limit yourself. Take different avenues, research your area. Is it something you want to do in an area that you're in? Look at population, call volume, those kind of things. Do you want to be hands-on? I love my job, but I never want to go in the houses that I can only imagine what they look like or what the scene would be like, but I'm happy to help in the capacity I am. I'm very proud. We do have a lot of turnover, but sometimes it's not always bad turnover. Sometimes it's good. A lot of people will come to us out of high school or as they're in college in their criminal justice career, and they're trying to decide if they want to go on and pursue law enforcement or EMS, and where they haven't hit that age requirement of 21, they'll start out in the dispatch center. So, it makes me very proud when they start here and then they're on the road and those are your people and they know, and you can, show them and guide them and help them transition. And I think if you're interested in it, interning somewhere, doing sit-ins, ride-alongs, or just getting a job in a dispatch center and kind of seeing how it works and what works for you. We have a young gentleman right now that, he thinks he wants to be in law enforcement, but he's not really sure, do I want to lean more toward the sheriff's office, state police? There are also different, city police, the call volume's different. So I feel like he gets a really good perspective of that. And every day he comes in, he learns so much about each one is so different, like who enforces the criminal complaints, mostly who does more paper service, who's, has more growth opportunity for him if he wants to be a bigger part of a team and be on a SWAT division or bike patrol or those kind of things. So I think just really researching your area, what's available, and just getting involved in the community. They have citizen police academies, those kind of things. Leadership of Madison County is another good one here to just kind of let you know all the aspects. So just don't limit yourself.
Thank you. Chief, I think we lost the fire chief. Randall working through some technical, so I'll go to Dr. Sandusky. What is the biggest challenge facing you, and what is the career advice you'd give for somebody wanting to start a career and as a first responder or doing the job you're doing today?
Okay, so I think education in law enforcement is very important. Some of the best officers that I've worked with are those that have gone and gotten their degrees. I think that not only does it help them in the road and in the field, but it also helps them with promotions. So one thing that I strongly push whenever I'm asked that question is pursuing education. The having the proper work-life balance, like we talked about, is important. Going and finding the right agencies. So from my experience, I've worked for several different agencies, and it's really important to find the one that matches you the best, because not all are the same.
Got it. I'm going to throw this one
And
as
what I
an
mean by
open.
that,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
oh, I'm sorry. I think we are having some technical difficulty. So when I say not all agencies are the same, working in a large metropolitan area is going to be much different than working in a rural community for all first responders. So there are some people that will enjoy one environment over the other, and I think that's just important when you're looking at different agencies to see what's the best fit.
Absolutely. This next question, I'm going to open it up for any panelists. We won't go down the line, but feel free to chime in. It kind of knocks off one off our list and then one from the audience. It is, how do you stay current with new or emerging technology in your field? So anyone that feels, I know Director Lynch and Officer Foster, I know they constantly are getting new technologies thrown in direction. So anybody that wants to chime in, feel free on that.
Well, we dive right in. We look at the technology. We go to conferences and trainings. We never stop training, and off that training and networking with other agencies and departments, and you see what they have and what the options are. And then you weigh them out. We do a lot of demos. We've done several CAD demos today. We're always trying to better that and to better suit your needs. And I think the biggest thing is just keeping an open mind. And anytime something's new is out, it's, you get, most of the time you can demo that free online and in person, and just grow with the technology and what it has to offer. Coming from someone that started with pencil and paper to now we're pushing out videos and text messages, and we can live stream. And I think you just have to go with it, and but just not overwhelm yourself to the point that the technology slows you down, or it's overwhelming your people to where they're getting behind and you're not still getting the service that you need. So technology is great, but just know your limitations and research it well and try not to overwhelm.
Thank you. Anyone else have input on how do you stay on technology in your current work field?
I think working patrol, I'm kind of at the bottom of the food chain, so stuff rolls downhill. So it's already been decided what I'm going to use. But I love when we get new technology. We recently got so we have a unified court system in the state of Kentucky. So all of our local courts go through the same system. So we have the administrative office of the courts for Kentucky, which is different from other states. But so I feel a lot of the time our technology related to the court system is very antiquated. Our websites crash all the time. They're very slow. They're kind of finicky. They look like they were done in the 90s and nobody's updated them. But we recently got to where we could do search warrants online now through our e-warrant system, which has been a huge help. Our department has recently gotten a hold of flock cameras and get access to flock cameras, and that is a tremendous help for investigations, whether we have vehicles running for us. If you're on a traffic stop and you have somebody, like I said, I'm in Kentucky, so if I have a traffic stop, somebody out of Georgia, and they're saying that they are just going for a vacation in Ohio or something, but it seems a little fishy, you can look and see how many times that they've been driving up and down the interstate. If they went up and down the interstate 4 times in the past, 2-3 weeks or whatever, you might be looking closer at drug trafficking or something like that, as opposed to just a regular, person going on vacation traffic stop. So I think it's been a huge help. I'm always trying to get access to more technology to help with investigations. I love investigations. I think it just helps you as a patrol officer build a stronger case. I know dispatch has helped us so much with them being able to allow us access to a 911 phone call, so I can have them email me the 911 phone calls that they heard in the dispatcher with the victim or a suspect, and then I can review the whole thing, analyze it, and type it into my report within 24 hours is awesome. It just helps your investigations. I like I said, I'm at the bottom of the food chain, so I don't necessarily struggle with like keeping up with technology because they just tell me when it's getting updated. I get sent an email saying that I have to do this policy review and get it done by the end of the week or whatever, and then we're just off and running with it. So I think it's great, but again, I'm not at the top. I'm not making the big decisions. So
Thank you. All right, I'll move on. I know, technology is always a big thing. That what usually from a chief's perspective that wags the tail of that specific topic is money. So there's a lot of we want to have the greatest and latest technology, although that comes with a price tag. But it seems like a lot of the agencies that I've been dealing with, and mine, the one that I used to be a chief of, is getting better, and they're starting to prioritize technology in their budgets, which is good to see for the future going forward. So, all right, this next question is, I'll go down the line, and it'll be for all panelists. I want to make sure I get this right. All right. And we'll start with Dr. Bodig. What would be advice you would give someone looking to get hired in your specific career field?
First, research. The internet is limitless. Definitely research, specifically with the Federal Air Marshal Service. We aren't one of the biggest. We're not the FBI or the DEA, but definitely researching what the Federal Air Marshal Service does, our mission. Because what I love going to, and attending recruitment events are individuals that come to me with questions. And not just a specific, what's your salary, what's your schedule like, more so the questions of, well, what is your day to day? What does a typical day as a Federal Air Marshal look like? What are, I would say also, when you are considering just not only for the Federal Air Marshal's Service, but any field, what does career progression look like? So what opportunities are available for you, not only as a frontline officer, but what are the opportunities like for career progression, promotion? Also, what professional development trainings are available to you as well? I think that the best knowledge is shared knowledge. And so as an officer, as a criminal justice practitioner, you are always evolving and you're always learning. So you also want to know what additional learning opportunities are available. Also, any educational incentives. What do entities or agencies have to offer in addition to or education? I know specifically for the Federal Air Marshal Service, we definitely offer a lot of tuition assistance. So what additional support can you have when you're coming into the door? If you want to pursue higher education, if you want to get certification courses, what are those things that are offered as well? If you are hired, what additional opportunities do you have to grow, not only personally and also professionally? In addition to not only the day-to-day researching what we do as a career field and having specific questions regarding career progression, a mentorship. Having mentors, it doesn't have to be within the Air Marshal Service, but it can just be anyone within the criminal justice field as a whole. This career has peaks and valleys. So definitely you want to be well-rounded. You're going to have some challenges, but at the end of the day, you want to have someone that can navigate you through those challenging times that you may inevitably hit in your career, and have someone that you can lean on, or a community that you can lean on to work through those things.
Thank you very much. Officer Foster, same thing. For someone looking to get hired, specifically in law enforcement, what advice would you give them?
I think networking is huge. I think, putting yourself out there, doing internship programs, doing ride-alongs, doing Citizens Police Academy. And then, like, I actually met Chief Ebert through coaching. I was coaching his daughter. And so just by talking to somebody who's in that career field and working for this department, I love this community. I love the city of Richmond and the community that's here. They've helped me my whole adult life. And so it wasn't a big jump for me to hear him talk about the department and hear him talk about how he views law enforcement in Richmond. And for me to be on board with that, we're very much community oriented policing. We prioritize getting out and networking and including our community with our growth and development. Not every department's like that. Some other departments are smaller or they just police differently. So networking, learning how people, what is their opinion of policing or law enforcement? What is their policing? How do they like to prioritize their day to day, schedule? Does your department prioritize time off? Do they prioritize family development or professional development, stuff like that? That's all stuff that you aren't necessarily going to learn from going to recruiting events, simply because obviously recruiting events are trying to get you to come on, and you don't always get the nitty gritty of what it's like day in and day out. Sometimes you might hit somebody on a good day or bad day, but that's the reality of working somewhere. Every department has its strengths and weaknesses. Every department has its highs and lows, and getting to know people and talking to them over a period of time, not just at one recruiting event, I think is a huge asset to you determining where you want to work.
Absolutely. And a little bit is behind the scenes on that. When I first got there, before I got there, there was probably, I would call 5 to 6 community events. I got hired in October, and when we finished that, the last few months, we went up to 18. Next year was 56. Next year was 100. And the last year before COVID hit was well on pace to be over 150 community events, some small, some big kind of thing. But it was definitely a core value of what I wanted to do as a chief, and that was probably what I was selling the best at the time when I cherry picked Officer Foster. So, Director Lynch, what advice would you are someone who does the hiring or sits on that process of doing the hiring. So, what advice would you give to somebody that wanted to work in dispatch?
For us, I like that if they do their research before they get here, they've looked up what our center does, who we dispatch for. We always send out a packet when they first apply to explain the process, and that they may have to, live on campus for 4 weeks and attend the training academy, and then there's so many hours within, and to have already been prepared and not act surprised when we're asking those questions. So to know that they've really went through the packet, we give them a lot of information to review. When we bring them in for their actual interview, we do a sit-in time in the actual dispatch center. So we run them just like a person off the street. When you come in, you have to be ran through NCIC to make sure you're clear. You sit down, you sit with a supervisor or a training officer, and they kind of go through the call process, what we do, what those calls look like. We do a training scenario where we show them if we have a certain domestic situation and someone can't talk and they don't feel comfortable, like this is how they could communicate. And if they can't communicate, this is how we could look them up. This is the technology we can use. This is how we can ping the call. We explain all of that, make sure it gets explained during their sit-in time. And then at the end, we do a scenario question. That is the scenario to see how well they paid attention to that. And at the end, we open it up for questions. And I'm always impressed for those that have done their research and asked the questions. What are your day-to-days? What do you expect from me? When would you, at month 3, where would you expect me to be? At month 6, where would I be? And what has been your hardest challenge within your career? And those kind of questions, because it really sets you up to have that open, honest communication with them to what you expect and then what they expect. And you already know that in the interview process. So those things are always really great. And to just come in with a really open mind, and we do a very relaxed setting. We do have a panel interview, but we try to be very relaxed and just talk one-on-one, because you're going to be doing a lot of talking in the position. So we just like to get all that out there and kind of what it feels like to be in the room and with all the phones ringing and all the distractions and those kind of things to make sure they're ready for it. So
Absolutely. Dr. Sadowski, how about you? What advice would you give for someone specifically looking to get hired in your field?
Yep. So most of what I would answer has actually already been said. There were some excellent responses. The only thing I would add is to talk to senior officers from the specific agency that somebody might be interested in, just to hear their perspectives. You're going to be able to tell if they've had a good career or if they're disgruntled. If they're disgruntled, and there's a lot of them, it may be worth looking at a different agency.
A lot of truth to that. I think a lot of people don't do their due diligence in seeing why the attitudes of some of the people that work there are what they are. So, and I think to echo what Director Lynch was saying, to me, what I liked is when a candidate came in to interview for a police job, they had done some research on my specific police department, right? We all get it. We all get the generic, we want to help people. Well, you're not in this field generally if you're not here to help people, or at least not in the beginning. So to have somebody that can move beyond that, when I'm doing an interview and our social media feed is flooded with all the community interactions, and you can't tell me one thing over the last year when I probably have 100 things posted. Are you trying to get a job, or do you really want to work for that department? So that would be my tip as a retired chief of police. Not only research the career field you want, but the agency specifically that you're looking to get a career in. So time's starting to wind down. It goes quick. So I think what I'll do is the last set of a closing question. And basically what I would like to go down the line is to say, if you could speak to a younger version of you, so if you can go back in time, what is the one bit of guidance you would give a younger you if you could do it all over again? We'll start with Dr. Bodeg.
If there was some advice I can give to my younger self, it would be show up as your authentic self, because that's okay. I think, and Ms. Officer Foster spoke to this very early on in our conversation, that when you come into law enforcement, if you don't know who you are, it can change you. And that is one thing that I quickly noticed within my first year as a law enforcement officer. You can become jaded, but it also depends on who you surround yourself with, and also knowing your values and your morals. I am one of those people. I am very motivational. I'm very inspirational. I'm always going to find work. Sometimes that was accepted, sometimes it was frowned upon. I don't like to be idle. So if there is a project or something that I can work on, something that can help better my agency, I would do that. And I own that. And also just having a good network. I would have collaborated earlier in my career. I didn't get mentorship until I was about 5 years in. So I would have looked for a mentor soon as I entered into the career of law enforcement, and even with the family background. And I had people to look up to, but sometimes you just want someone that's within your field, or that's not a family member, someone outside of your personal circle that you can get advice from. And so those are definitely some things that I would have told my younger self.
Excellent. I appreciate the advice. Officer Foster, how about you? What would you tell yourself 5 years ago if you could go back in time?
There's not a whole lot that I would like to change about my career so far, but I think one thing that kind of stands out. So I'm currently getting my master's in criminal law, and I wish I'd done it so much earlier. Like I said, one of my mentors was one of the local judges, Judge Neal, and he told me when I was an undergrad that I should go to law school, and I thought, oh no, that's too hard, that's too much for me, and it's not. Honestly, it's so, money aside, finance aside, it's so attainable. If you're a college graduate and you want to put in the work, just put in the work. It is attainable. It seems lofty, I think, sometimes, as an undergraduate, to think that you can have your doctorate. But I think, if I had started my master's a couple of years ago, I could have a doctorate now, and I love education. I love to learn, and all that stuff, some of it's theory, but it's so applicable to my day-to-day life, in my job. Like, all of it matters. All of it can be applied if you put the work in and apply it. And it's not just a piece of paper. Like, it truly is. I just think it makes you such a more well-rounded person, more educated. You're better to testify in court. It just makes you an all-around better officer. So just specifically for law enforcement, I think just growing your education, going to college, getting an associate's, getting your bachelor's, getting a master's, like, do all that you can, and start early, because, life's short. You don't know when you'll get an opportunity to do it.
Absolutely. Thank you. Chief made back, we worked through some technical difficulties. I'm going to skip you, but I'll give you the question. That way you know it. Basically, we're doing our closing for each panelist, and the question is, what would be something that you would tell a younger person if you can go back in time? So I'm going to give that to Director Lynch first, and then we'll come back and give you some time to think about it.
If I could go back and tell myself, it would be to not try to always avoid the conflict and the difficult conversations, because without them, there's never growth or change, and it's very hard especially new in your career. Sitting back a lot of times when you know something's just not right or something could be done better, to really advocate for yourself more and to believe in yourself and know your values and your cores and stay strong to those, and not try to feel bad when you have the big ideas, but just really to be able to have those tough conversations and advocate for yourself to get where you need to go and take advantage of every bit of the training. Because a lot of times you will be offered so much training that is free and you're able to do, or you're getting paid to do the training, and to take all of those early in your career, because they really will help you build over time.
Absolutely. Dr. Sandusky, you've been around a while. What would you tell your younger version of you?
Sure. So when I started, I was working every detail that was available. I take every overtime shift that was available. So the one thing that I would tell myself is to, develop or foster a better work-life balance at the beginning. I learned it later on in my career, but at the beginning, I was really just working too much. And looking back, that's something that that I shouldn't have been so aggressive on in pursuing all the overtime and details if it wasn't necessary.
Absolutely. I don't think I've even got the work-life balance now, and I'm retired, so I'm still working on it. It's more of an art than a science for me at this point. Chief, I'm going to let you bring us home. What would you tell a younger version of yourself to do in a career?
So there's really two things, and I'll echo what the doctor just said about work-life balance. We've talked about the mental health aspect, throughout the program. It is so important to maintain balance. There are other people that you personally mean a lot to in their lives, and people that obviously you have a lot of respect for. You've got to spend time with them, and so you've got to strike that balance. And I think that helps from the mental health aspect. And then the other piece is, as early in your career as you can start to realize, it's about paying it forward. Pay attention to the new officers, the new firefighters, the new paramedics, the new air marshals, whatever it is that are just coming in, and help them grow and develop, and get through the things that were, a challenge for all of us when we started out. And the sooner you can realize it's about paying it forward to the next generation, it becomes very, very rewarding.
Absolutely. I think we're on the same page. I came up in the time when I first started law enforcement, the mentality was when you made it to roll call, if you were a rookie, you didn't speak because you didn't have enough clout in the room. And, hindsight 2020, you look back at that and you're like, how much more we could have got done if we would have been open and trying to get pay it forward to the next generation. My one takeaway, if I had to talk to my younger self, would be to get better at networking. I was good at finding mentors. I'm really bad at networking, and that has been the case for a long time. And it wasn't until really in the last couple of years as a chief of police and now in the academia world that I've embraced networking and seen how much it can open doors for you, much easier than just being the best worker bee out there. So that would be my takeaway. I want to take the time now to thank all the panelists. If you would drop it in the chat, say thanks. It's a great panel. They've done a great job answering questions. I know we didn't get to all of them, but time does run out for us. And it has been a great event, and it's been a great month at Purdue Global celebrating first responders. We do this every year. We have panels come up. For those that found us through Eventbrite, look for that. Alpha Phi Sigma, which is our Criminal Justice Honor Society. We will start using that as a place for us to find future events. So if you're on our tracking list on that, you'll get the automatic invite as these events come out. I'm very happy, very excited to have such great panelists. We thank you all again for taking the time out of your personal and professional schedules to be with us. And we look forward to having each and every one of you come back in future events.